Gemini, hello, Amanda here. Welcome to Unseen Hands Healing. This is going to be your reading for April 2020. We are looking at the shape you are shifting out of this month, the shape you're shifting into, and what that shape shift looks and feels like. So, Gemini, before we get into cards, as I was meditating on your energy, I saw a very simple image of you picking a scab. Just picking out a scab, picking out a scab, picking out a scab. And I kind of did briefly see that, like, you picking at this scab, sort of reopening, essentially the metaphorical image, message of that image is reopening an old wound, or not allowing something to heal naturally, the way the body heals, which is from the inside out, hardening over that protective shell on the outside so that it can seal back up inside under that protective cover, which is also sort of a larger or a smaller, very body related image talking about something larger that could be happening with this pandemic, which is, it's like we are being asked to hole up under our protective barriers that many of us have, which is a house and four walls around us. Obviously, not everyone has that, but those that have it are being asked to stay under those protective barriers so that healing can happen for all of us collectively, especially if you have tested positive for this COVID-19. That's even more of a reason to sort of like scab over and isolate while you heal before re-entering contact with the outside world. If you remove that scab, that protective covering prematurely, the thing will not heal. Interesting collective imagery that's coming through, a very personal image too, of like picking open old stuff. Picking open old wounds, not allowing something to just be left alone to heal, but feeling like you have to pick at it. And you know, they tell you when you pick at a scab, it's kind of this like neurotic behavior that actually makes the thing worse. Okay, all that energy coming through. Interesting. Let's see how it relates in the cards. We're using the Spolia Tarot today. I'll give you a couple shuffles here. And we'll get down to it. Get down to it. It's like picking a scab too is a very physical expression of a mental energy. Neurotic energy is largely mental, but it's often expressed physically in behaviors and patterns and habits. Maybe some of y'all are finding your neuroses at a peak during this time of unusual stress. And maybe you're finding that kind of coming out in very physical ways. Okay, here we go. Let's ask the shape you are shifting out of, Gemini, this month. What is the shape that Gemini is shifting out of in April 2020? You saw that, popped right out at me. Page of Swords. Touchdown. It's the moment of touchdown. The moment the point of this needle meets the earth and kicks up dust. The moment the needle meets the surface of the earth, of the skin, whatever, pierces a hole. Sort of analogous to this like picking at a scab thing that I was feeling. Interesting. Let's see what shape you are shifting into, Gemini. What's the shape that Gemini is shifting into in April? Shifting out of the Page of Swords. Whoa. Oh my goodness. Fire. Everything's on fire. You know, the world feels like it's on fire right now. I'm actually seeing this as this like inflamed inflammation. Which is interesting though, because if you think about the way the body heals, since that's the imagery that we got right off the bat, and that seems to be what this is talking about, it's like sometimes things have to get worse in order to get better. You know, like the scab is a really like itchy, irritating part of the healing process, but a really necessary and protective part. Just like when you have a fever, the body's inflammatory response to a fever is actually part of the healing of the fever. You know, it's like the body will usually heal a fever naturally if it's allowed to go through its inflammatory process. And I'm seeing the fire as being this inflammatory process, this inflammatory response. And then usually the fever will get to such a peak that it will then break. And then you get that, like the sweats, the heat gets to its maximum expression, and then the temperature breaks and the body cools back down. So there's something coming through here for you, Gemini, about like shifting out of, I think this is about a healing process, which is really interesting too, because in your, in the message, the guide that came through the Mary L tarot for you in the global pandemic reading, if y'all haven't checked that out, do check it out. It's a couple of videos back. You'll see it very clearly marked global pandemic collective reading. And in the section that I pulled for Gemini, this was your guide, the Three of Swords. And the Three of Swords talks all about wounding, and it talks about this process of holding on to old wounds. You know, the Three of Swords talks about pain. It talks about specifically emotional pain and discomfort and grief and heartbreak and betrayal and all of these feelings that can come in the healing process. It is a card about emotional upset for sure, emotional mental distress. It can also be a card about healing, you know, like that being a necessary part of the healing process. And that's so this reading really, it's interesting so far, these readings in April for each of y'all seem to be further illuminating the general messages that came through in the global pandemic reading, which makes sense because we're still, and the reason I pulled these cards out for each of the signs for this April shift reading is because we're still very much, you know, in the thick of this pandemic energy in April. So part of this healing for you, Gemini, I think is releasing, letting go of these swords in the heart, achieving this feeling of freedom and lightness that can come on the other side of a healing process, by allowing yourself to go from the start of the healing process, which is sort of like the inciting incident, to use a theater term. The inciting incident, the moment shit hit the fan, so to speak. And that could be like speaking towards the pandemic, but it could also be speaking towards like in terms of your own healing process, whatever this month and this like global crisis may be revealing in your life in terms of wounding. To me, the Page of Swords in this context is speaking to going back to the inciting incident, the first moment the needle pierced the skin. The first moment that wound was created that keeps reopening. The inciting incident being the first step in the healing process, and then like in April still being very much in the inflammatory stage of healing, which is uncomfortable. Everything's kind of flared up. That's what I'm seeing here. And allowing this process to unfold. So let's ask how this process is unfolding this month. How are you getting from point A to point B here. What does the shift look like for Gemini in April? Well, that was fast, and we got Page of Wands, more fire energy. Okay, that's way too, half the deck just fell out. Okay, whoa. Look at that. It wants to be like this, which is interesting. Look at that, Gemini. Talk about heat. Talk about fire. I mean, it just feels like the Gemini that I'm speaking to, this, whatever this wound is or whatever this process is, it's like your world is on fire, you know? And that's what it feels like for many of us in the thick of this crisis. It can feel like this is just, it's like if you imagine this pandemic as sort of being like a forest fire, just spreading like wildfire. There's a reason that term exists, spreading like wildfire. And look, we got it in your reading. And maybe you are in a place where you are being very directly affected by that energy of this spreading like wildfire. Because here we got the wildfire. Look at that. King of Wands, Page of Wands. Page of Wands coming first. The message, because pages are messengers, the message arrives that this thing is spreading like wildfire, right? I mean, the entire card is like, rah! The message arrives. It's the irritation, page. We move from, part of your journey here is from the Page of Swords, which is sort of like the mental, because swords are mental energy, like the mental touchdown. And then we have like full blaze, page of air, page of fire. It's like the stage of just like gathering information and sort of hearing the messages and realizing what's going on. And then we move to the Queen of Cups and the King of Wands. It's like the fire. They have to go together, interestingly. It's like the image that you need to see, or that we need to see here, Gemini, is the cool water energy with these like cool colors, blue, in between at the heart of this flare up. Maybe this is speaking to like a health flare up that you could be having. And I just want to be super clear. I'm not a doctor, nor am I giving medical advice on this reading in any way. Okay. If you are experiencing any kind of health issues, you've absolutely got to talk to a doctor at this time, especially. Okay, but what we are seeing is a flare up with a card of healing right at the center, which is really beautiful. The process of development from the Page to the King, which is further indicating the process of healing in a linear kind of progression. It's like this is just the way the body naturally heals, or the way the heart naturally heals, whatever most applies to you, maybe both. And right at the center of all this flare up is this beautiful water energy. The queens talk about internal energy, which I really love. It's like external energy. It's sort of like this is the external expression of the message coming through. This is like the king up on their power throne, watching all of this happen, but certainly not being immune to it, right? Because the fire is visiting him too. And this feels like the people down below, like right in the thick of it. Something like that. And then right at the heart of everything, the queen, ruling the internal, intuitive, emotional, receptive, listening space. If you did tune into that collective reading I did on the pandemic, a really strong image came through of listening in a conch shell, and that's what I'm seeing here. It's like there is, and I'm seeing this that's pouring out. I'm seeing this as healing ointment dropping down in the internal space. When you've got a scab, you can't necessarily see the healing that's going on underneath. All you see is like the flare up, maybe the redness all around the scab, the itchiness, the nasty looking scab situation. You don't see the fact that the skin is actually sealing and healing, and that scab is helping to trap in the moisture, water energy necessary to do that kind of like wet healing. I'm being drawn to, these days people use Saniderm sheets. When you get a tattoo, they'll put like a sheet, a protective sheet that's clear and looks like plastic, but it's a different material. They use it in healing burn victims, actually, which is super applicable to this reading. And it's a type of healing called wet healing, where essentially they seal up the wound in all of its own plasma and all of its own like secretions. And as it begins to secrete its own fluid, it gets to stay wet, and it's able to heal faster and kind of in its own juices. And there's something about that. This like flare up is actually sealing on either side the healing that's happening underneath, the emotional healing that's happening underneath, which is of course easily connected to a collective reading of like the dumpster fire that this pandemic is, and the absolute destruction it is bringing, the destruction that fire energy can bring, you know, the actual damage to the tissues that a fever, that kind of flare up can bring, is not to be discounted. The reading is also saying that there is some emotional, deep, intuitive, emotional healing happening underneath. And I think it's really interesting that it's showing the ocean and this whale. It's like, you know, if you've been reading the news lately, you may have picked up on the fact that our planet in places seems to be healing in the midst of all of this. Certain parts of the planet, that mainly us, that have been destroying the planet have become inflamed and suspended so that something underneath can begin to heal. Okay, Gemini. So anyway, that's a collective interpretation of this reading, and it is also obviously applying to you personally, especially since your guide through this pandemic is the card of woundedness and wound healing. Okay, Gemini, we are going to the Botanical Tarot now, this beautiful deck by Kevin J. Stanton, and we are asking, you know, all these decks, the images in these decks are flowers, which is really beautiful. And I've been using this deck to ask, you know, as we are in the wreckage of this pandemic that it is wreaking on our infrastructure, what new growth is sprouting up through the wreckage? So that's what we're asking for you, Gemini. What new growth is sprouting up through the wreckage for Gemini at this time? The Magician. Beautiful. The Magician energy talks about using the tools at your disposal, using the resources that you have available to you to take action and create the life you want. It's a creative creator force. It's like embodying the force of creation. Generative. It's creating something new out of this wounding. or perhaps the way this has inflamed and the way this wound perhaps is having a flare up for you is actually somehow also revealing resources within you or around you that you didn't know you had, that could be incredibly useful tools for you as you begin to create the life that you want to create. Okay, beautiful. So Gemini, we are going to take this now into an extended reading. This is just a general idea of what the cards are offering you for your shift in the month of April. Now we are going to get into it in this extended reading. We're going to use other decks, pull clarifier cards, and get some more specific energy for how this might be playing out for you. If you are interested in viewing that extended reading, stick around. There will be a preview of it at the end of this video so you can make sure it's resonating with you. If it is, click the link in the description box below and that will take you over to Patreon. Patreon is where you can view that extended reading, okay? It is an online community that I have created for those of you who have been following my work for some time and you know it resonates with you and you're looking to go deeper with this work every month or even every week. There's an option for you to do that over there, okay? So head over to Patreon. Please read the description when you get there so that you know how Patreon works. And if you have any questions, do reach out to me. The last thing I want to leave you with is that I am offering 10% off to everybody for personal readings at this time. Not only my Patreon patrons, but I've opened that up to the general public as I recognize that people need extra guidance during this time. So if that sounds like you, get in touch with me at unseenhandshealing.com. Okay. You should also know that I recognize that people are having income freezes during this time. So if that is something you are experiencing, I am willing to work with you in terms of timing on your payment. We can work out a payment plan. So again, unseenhandshealing.com is the place to visit. Look at all my offerings and get in touch that way. All right. Gemini, thank you so much for joining me. I wish you all the best here as we move through this together in the month of April. Take care. You're in this feeling of like being out in outer space without a tether. Like no one is coming for you. Imagine the loneliness and imagine the isolation. I think this is the energy that you are very much steeped in. But then look, is it true there is no other? Which in conjunction with this card, I'm seeing as like, is it true no one is coming for you? Is it true that you have no one? Is it true there is no other option at your disposal? Is it true that you have no one? And sort of like ding, like knocking you on your head to expand your view of the situation. Speaking of that, we have this card now. Perception is reality. Don't forget that.